Hello, my story is titled Seeking Justice in North Las Vegas, Nevada. On March the 2nd, 2015, I was away from home with my oldest son. I was on Craig and Long Mountain, and what happened, my 14-year-old daughter, she called me and she told me that my 22-year-old and my 16-year-old daughter were feuding inside of my house. I talked to the 22-year-old and I told her that I was going to call the police and for her to put the police officer on the phone. That was my worst mistake. Anyway, when I called 911 because I was on the bus, I was trying to get home, I spoke to Officer Coleman, who was the dispatcher that day on March the 2nd, which was on a Monday evening around 5:46 p.m. Officer Coleman informed me that he could not send no one to meet me to come and pick me up so I could get back home and see what was going on inside of my house. When I finally got to Craig and Losey with my oldest son, my my 14-year-old daughter, she called me and she told me that my kids were fighting inside my house, the 22 and 16-year-old. I called 911 and the police responded to my home address. When the police responded to my home address, I told my daughter, I said, when the police arrived, I said, let me speak to the police officer so I could talk to him. She called me back and she said, Mama, they tasing Robert. They tasing Robert, who was my 17-year-old son. What happened? My 16-year-old daughter, named Taz, she went outside because she was rebellious and she was a child. She was 16 years of age. She followed my 22-year-old outside. The 22-year-old went to the neighbor's house next door. The first officer on the scene walked up to my daughter, asked her, what is her name? She told him her name. He said, I don't like the way you answer me. Put your hands behind your back. And he threw her into the back of the police car on the outside of the Blazer. Due to him throwing her on the back of the police car on the outside, this is the damage that was done to my daughter's leg. Due to the damage that was done to my daughter's leg, while she was in handcuffs, she was handcuffed, her leg was hit up against the police blazer, and after that, he took her and he put her in the back seat of the police car and he tied her up with a seat belt. This is the damage that was done to my daughter's arm because she was tied up for so long. My daughter was sitting in the back of the police car. She was screaming. The 22-year-old was next door inside the neighbor's house. My 17-year-old son, named Robert, he came downstairs to see who was screaming outside. He went to go tell my 16-year-old daughter, Taz, just be quiet and get inside of the back of the police car. Another police officer walked past him, came inside my house. When my son came inside, the officer told him, you know, I can arrest you for that, right? My son was like, arrest me for what? I didn't do nothing. So the police officer took his left arm, twisted, put a chicken wing on his arm, and he put his arm up to his neck. And he made my son fall. They started fighting on the floor inside of my house. So the officer took his knee and put it between my son's neck and his shoulder. He took his left knee and he put it on my son's left wrist, which caused a contusion on his left thumb and on his left index finger, which caused it to go numb for a very long time. Okay, so what happened was my 22-year-old or 14-year-old, they were standing underneath my staircase watching these cops beat the hell out of my 17-year-old son. And all I could hear in the background, I heard the police officer in the background telling my son, this is why I hate you stupid fucking black ass kids. Stop resisting arrest. Stop resisting. Give me your hand. Put your hand behind your back. My son had no choice but to fight for his life that day. What he did, he kicked the officer, the sergeant, on his leg, who ran inside the house because the first cop who started fighting with my son, he called for backup. So two more cops ran inside my house. When they ran inside my house, they had my son on the ground. The sergeant tried to kick my son in the face with a steel toe boot, and then he tried to put my son in a headlock. Luckily, my son was able, with the help of God above, to slide through like a slithering snake from the sergeant's arms. So he saved his own life. So he's still alive today. Now my son is suffering from memory loss. He's suffering from seizures. He's on anti-seizure medication, and he's on blood pressure medication. So the next day I took my son to the doctor's office, to our family doctor. Before I took him to our family doctor, my daughter, the 22-year-old, she was on the phone talking to me, and she tells me, Mama, they're tasing Robert. They're tasing Robert. And so I'm saying, what the hell is going on? What is going on inside of my house? This was not the plan. This was not supposed to be happening. So my 22-year-old, she tells my 14-year-old and my 12-year-old son, name is G. Oh, it's 15 minutes.